the history of Western philosophy begins in that area of the world which I hope you recognize as the Aegean Sea, with Greece and Asia Minor. The first known philosopher who's talked about, at least, Thales of Miletus, came from just about that location, in the center of the west coast of the Asia Minor Peninsula. In other words, the Greek colonies scattered around the Aegean. Now, a question that one usually starts with is, how do you account then for the rise of Western philosophy? There in the Aegean area in ancient Greece. And there are several lines of explanation which are important. One is, of course, that it stands at the crossroads between East and West, where traditional ideas would be challenged by the interaction with Eastern culture, simply because of the way in which the trade routes came through Asia Minor and down the Meander Valley. The river Meander meanders down to the sea, so this is the Meander Valley there, and the trade routes come that way. So, all right, cross-cultural stimulation led to the asking of some basic questions. A second thing that is emphasized a great deal, and I think appropriately, is that the early Greek philosophers were really pre-scientific scientists. They were asking questions about the natural world, about the natural order, about the natural processes. They raised questions about basic elements. What basic element or elements underlie all of the rich furniture of the heavens and the earth that we see? What are the causal processes that account for the variation of things and the changes that occur? That sort of question. Early philosophy of nature, primitive cosmology, questions about the origin of the cosmos as we know it began to arise. And you could see how they could be connected with the differences between East and West and the stimulation that comes with the mythology of the two interacting and coming into some degree of conflict. But there is a third feature that is tremendously important, and I think, I've come to think increasingly, of particular importance. The earlier Greek poets, dramatists, had the conviction that the cosmic order which we observe in nature is also a moral order. A notion of cosmic justice is something that surfaces among some of those early literary figures. In between the Odyssey and the Iliad, it begins to appear. In Hesiod, it's explicit. In Aeschylus and Sophocles, it's present. So that the question is whether there is an order to the cosmos that includes a moral order. If this is a moral universe, how do we explain that fact? So then we have really two philosophical lines of thought in accounting for the origin of Greek philosophy here. One that focuses simply on reflection about the physical cosmos, and the other about reflection on the moral order which they believed to exist in the processes of nature. So what I want to do today is to focus on the first of these, their attention to the physical order, and then next time to turn our attention to the moral order. Take a look at that. Okay? Now, with that in mind, take a look at the outline that I've just given you of the pre-Socratic philosophers, those prior to Socrates. You notice I've grouped them, where the principal grouping is in terms, you notice, of various kinds of monism under Romans 1, 2, and 3, as against pluralism. That is to say, the question as to whether there is one basic element that accounts for everything, or whether there are many basic elements. That would be, obviously, a kind of qualitative monism, or pluralism, as the case may be. Qualitative. Is the one basic element, or the many basic elements? But it also involves a quantitative question, whether the universe is numerically one all-inclusive, solid kind of sphere, or whether there are numerically many distinguishable things. Now that sounds abstruse, for the simple reason that you think you're something different than I am, which implies there are many different things. So with a quantitative monism is going to arise some very fundamental question about the reliability of our sense experience. Because if sense experience tells us we are many in number, but the theory becomes that everything is one in number, there's something wrong either with the theory that everything is one, or else something wrong with our sense experience. So that will arise later on when we get down to the group labeled Eleatics, absolute monism, named Eleatics after Elia, which is in the toe of Italy, where some of these people were. So that quantitative issue arises there. But at the outset, we're dealing in that naive monism of the Milesians with a qualitative pluralism, or qualitative monism. How many basic elements are there? Now, remember, they've never been in the chemistry lecture hall. They've never seen the table of the elements. And impressed as they are by the ordered arrangement of things, the initial tendency is to look for one basic element. And as you read these materials, and I hope you will have read through the primary and secondary materials on the pre-Socratics by the end of this week, as you read these materials, you'll find that Thales thought that everything was ultimately reducible to, derived from, the one element he called water. Now, for the moment, disregard the fact that you don't think it's an element, H2O. He wasn't to know that, poor Thales, you see. It still sounds like rather a wild hypothesis. Everything composed of water? Well, wait a minute. Water is a remarkably adaptable kind of thing. It comes in liquid, solid, and vapor. It is essential to life, not only to your life and mine, but to vegetation. Notice how brown everything is around here? We've had quite a drought this summer. I think I've mowed my front lawn once since early June, which is a welcome change, but it's a tragic one, you see. No, water is so fundamental to everything that goes on. That necessity, that understandably Thales conjectured that maybe this is the basic stuff. Well, he wasn't the only person in the business. And you notice the name of Anaximander, who, because he recognized that you have not only wetness, you have only dryness, you have also dryness, he began to see you have opposing qualities. And the same in other regards. Heat and cold. Light and dark. Male and female. And inasmuch as if you have opposing properties, no one can be more basic than the other, he supposed that the basic element must be something that is undefinable, and that's what the word apeiron means. It cannot be defined. It cannot be delineated, marked off. The Greek word peras means a border, a demarcation line. The alpha privative makes it negative. So apeiron, it has no definition. It's undefinable, you see. Anaximenes, on the other hand, thought that air was the basic essential. And so you begin to get this variety. And what's surfacing, if you're familiar with Greek literature, what's surfacing is the fact that they are playing with the various elements that the Greeks talked about even in their literature. Earth, air, fire, and water. Those are the four classic Greek elements. Some have suggested that they represent the four necessities of life. Earth, food, air, breath, fire, warmth, water, something to drink and nourish us. Earth, air, fire, and water, four necessities of life. But you notice that here we have Anaximenes, here we have Thales. Later on we'll find Heraclitus and some of the Stoics plugging in on fire. You see? In other words, in terms of the elements as they conceived them, the elements with which they were familiar, which one of these is most basic? Or is it none of these? But there is a third feature that is a second thing that is emphasized a great deal, and I think appropriately, is that the early Greek philosophers were really pre-scientific scientists. They were asking questions about the natural world, about the natural order, about the natural processes. They raised questions about basic elements. What basic element or elements underlie all of the rich furniture of the heavens and the earth that we see? What are the causal processes that account for the variation of things and the changes that occur. That sort of question. Early philosophy of nature, primitive cosmology, questions about the origin of the cosmos as we know it began to arise. And you could see how they could be connected with the differences between East and West and the stimulation that comes with the mythology of the two interacting and coming into some degree of conflict. But there is a third feature that is tremendously important, and I think, I've come to think increasingly, of particular importance. The earlier Greek poets, dramatists, had the conviction that the cosmic order which we observe in nature is also a moral order.